Whether your biggest cybersecurity concern is ransomware, unprotected network devices, zero trust success, or auditing your supply chains, firmware security is critical. Eclypsium's enterprise firmware security platform helps you identify devices and their firmware, verify the integrity of firmware wherever it's used, and fortify firmware throughout active remediation and automated patching. Visit securityweekly.com/Eclypsium to try out Eclypsium or learn more about enterprise firmware security. SOC analysts are often overworked and underappreciated. In fact, 78% say that working in the SOC is very painful. Yikes. Devo recently celebrated the first ever SOC Analyst Appreciation Day to pay some long overdue kudos to you and encourage organizations to improve SOC analyst job satisfaction and mental well-being. If you missed the event, no worries. You can watch all the sessions on SOC career development, overcoming the challenges of SOC work, and more on demand. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to watch. Workloads protected by VMware are the safest workloads in the multi-cloud. Private cloud, public cloud, any cloud. Stronger, with distributed protection to the API and everything east-west, inside, and cross-cloud. Stronger, with 3 layers of detection, trusting nothing and seeing everything, even the best hidden bad actors. Stronger, with an SE Labs AAA certified advanced NDR that brings the multi-cloud together for the win. You've got workloads, we've got security. VMware security. Simply stronger. Visit securityweekly.com/VMware to learn more.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover in one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions regularly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. And now, on to the Enterprise Security Weekly news. You can go to securityweekly.com/ESW250 and see all the news details there. See the articles that we're discussing today. So where should we start, folks, today? Should we start talking about SPACs since there's already been some discussion on that today?
Yeah, let's dig in. SPACs are a blank slate, so to speak.
But that was a good setup, though.
Yeah, very good.
So maybe we should take 2 seconds and describe what a SPAC is, Adrian?
Yeah, I don't know if you're prompting me to do it. I think you might be. So you correct me if I'm wrong. You know, okay. So I'll give the amateur description here based on what I've read. My understanding is that it's kind of like an investment vehicle where folks invest in it. They don't even know what they're investing in. So these companies will create these, basically, it sounds bad to say shell companies, but these shell companies.
They are.
That are going to be used to take a company public, a private company public, but you don't know what company it's going to be in advance. You know, so they go ahead and they raise the funds. And then they take that company public, and they get to skip the S1, you know, all the processes that, you know, basically protect investors from bad investments. And that takes the company public. And we've seen some successful ones. You know, I think sometimes we see it happen when there's challenges to going the traditional S1 IPO SEC route. But what brings up the topic today is QOMPLX, who's I forget exactly what they do. I want to say it something OSINT related, attack surface management maybe. You know, that SPAC, they went public via SPAC and did not go well. They basically undid it and took it back private. How did I do, Tyler?
You did excellent. You clearly know what the hell you're talking about. There's a couple twists in SPACs that make it interesting, though. As an investor, there's typically a floor that you can actually get out of the SPAC right before they actually take the company public if you don't believe in the company. So there is a bit of an escape hatch. But most of the time people don't take it, but there is optionality to do so. And then the other thing is, let's say the holding company is public for a random number of $1 billion, and they want to take a company public that ends up being a multi-billion-dollar company. They'll add what's called a PIPE, which is a private investment in public equity, I think it stands for. But essentially, it's a it's a discounted raise, essentially a secondary raise, a discounted raise that you can get into if you know the right people and have the right amount of money, can get into these kinds of things as they actually take the company public. So there's a little bit of nuance to it, but you pretty much nailed exactly what a SPAC is. And many companies have come through the SPAC chain over the course of the last couple of years. It's been around for a long time, but it came back into vogue within the last couple of years. Hey, and somebody go answer that door.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
There goes our fabulous host. In the meantime, I can talk a little bit about this complex. Tuesday, they mutually agreed to terminate their merger agreement, effective immediately, with I believe Tailwind was the SPAC holding corp that was going to take them public, and so. It's interesting that a lot of these SPACs are starting to fall apart or take companies public that may or may not have enough oversight, right, to actually be successful in the public market. So, Katie, do you have any views or commentary on SPACs in general?
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting twist on the, IPO/acquisition space. We've been talking for the last couple of weeks about how much money is floating around in cybersecurity and what that means, and is it overblown in our company? What does unicorn status even mean anymore? I think the thing for me that always gets me hung up when we talk about SPACs is this blank check mentality. It's, here's some money. You want to invest in a company. You don't know what company. You don't know what segment of the industry. You might not even necessarily know what industry it is, depending on what kind of investor you are. If you have a broad-based portfolio. But the idea that they have 2 years, it's money changing hands, and you don't know why. But it's rich people getting rich, which, good for them. But it sort of, it just sections off a segment of the industry and makes it almost untouchable because it's this insider trading. And so whether that's right or wrong, that's not really my place to determine. What I am concerned about with SPACs and how it affects the greater market is, what is this going to mean when there's some sort of level setting in cybersecurity? Because there's no way that in 5-10 years from now, we're going to keep seeing these crazy, crazy, crazy numbers without some sort of market adjustment, without whether the cybersecurity or the market more generally, in the US, globally, having some sort of adjustment. How are SPACs contributing to that? Because they're artificially raising the prices of companies. Because if you're getting loans for a company, you don't even know what it is. How can you decide what to pay for it? Like when I go into a store and say, I want to buy a mug, I don't say, I have unlimited funds for a mug. I mean, maybe I do. But I also don't say, let's say I have $100 to spend. I'm just going to spend all that money on whatever I see. It depends what's in the store. It depends what my mood is. It depends on a ton of stuff. And with SPACs, they're getting all this money to make a determination in 2 years. And a lot of times what happens is after that 2 years, if they find a company that they want to acquire, they actually need to go and get more money.
Right, and that's where the pipe process comes in. That's right. So what's interesting, if we talk about some of the cybersecurity SPACs, IronNet, I believe, was IPO'd via a SPAC. This Complex, which I hate the spelling of it. It feels like it's just a hacker way of writing it, but Complex obviously attempted to go SPAC. The VC firm led by Dave DeWalt, former McAfee and FireEye CEO, raised Night Dragon Acquisition Corp. Raised a SPAC. I don't know if they've actually brought anything public through that SPAC, but they raised a SPAC in March. So there's a lot of money floating around here, and it is 100% driving up the valuations of businesses. Catherine just Katie just typed into our chat, once you go SPAC, you can't go back. And that's so true. But, as a retail investor, it's interesting because I can get in and out of that SPAC. And basically what I'm betting on is the investor to go buy a company I trust, right? So let's take the Night Dragon SPAC as a case study, right? Dave DeWalt, his team, those guys make great investments, have done tons of cybersecurity backed VC runs. They know what the hell they're doing. Very smart guys. I can make a bet and say, hey, at $10 a share floor, I'll come in at 12. I risk $2 a share, and I'm going to take a shot and believe that Dave's going to bring a great company to bear through that SPAC. So I don't think it's all dangerous, but I also think it is skirting a lot of the oversight that comes with a real IPO, because you don't have to go through. You're essentially doing the acquisition into a shell company that's already public, and so it makes it a lot safer, easier, less risky for the business.
Right. It's the fast pass versus, having to wade through it. And there are positives and negatives. My concern is more on the artificial inflation of the market. Because if you look at other adjacent industries, everybody in cybersecurity knows if you can get into cybersecurity with some sort of IT background, you're going to make a nice hefty percentage more being in cyber. And that is a result of a lot of the things that are happening, not SPACs in particular, but that's one of the things that's making the industry this very rich industry.
Yeah. And in the case of QOMPLX, before we kick it back to Adrian to go on to the next topic, in the case of QOMPLX, that deal essentially fell through. They were going to come public through a merger agreement. It fell through, and they blamed market conditions, which is interesting because the S&P was up 7.6 over the last 3 months, 7.6%. So clearly 7.6 gain in the market was a suboptimal condition, which I don't understand. But it sounds like they didn't have the demand to bring that one public, and they're going to try again. So we'll see what happens with the Tailwind SPAC and what they end up getting their hands connected to.
Yeah. So, to wrap up that conversation, it sounds like the selling point here are the people behind the SPAC, that are raising the funds for the SPAC. That's really what you're investing in.
Yeah, absolutely. I've personally put a bunch into, I forget the guy's name, Chamath something. He brought DraftKings, I think, a handful of big ones through SPACs, right. And then he kind of fell off his perch, right? He started getting a bunch of misses, and I haven't done anything behind his SPACs in quite some time. So, yeah, you're betting in the investor is what you're betting on.
Yeah, makes sense. Jumping to the head of the list, that was story number 6 on our list. If you're reading along with our show notes, jumping up to the fundings. Drata, not sure how to say that, but one of the quickest we've seen leap to unicorn status. And to Katie's point earlier, what does unicorn even mean today? I think we're close to 40 unicorns using the old measurement in cybersecurity, and I've suggested that we need to adjust. The startup valued at $1 billion equals unicorn value to somewhere where unicorn as a term still has meaning. Because there's, I think in the entire industry, we're closing in on 700 unicorns. So it's 700 unicorns were that common. We wouldn't call them unicorns.
Herd of unicorns. You can't be unique in a herd.
Is there even a term for a herd of unicorns? Because if they're that unique, should there ever be a herd? Oh,
collective noun unicorn.
A blessing. A unicorn is a magical animal. Which is why a group of unicorns is called a blessing.
But that's completely counterintuitive, because you can't have a group of something that's so rare.
Well, it wouldn't be a blessing otherwise, right? That's why it's a blessing.
So we should talk about the blessing of cybersecurity companies that we have.
I mean, in all fairness, Tyler, I just read that on the internet, so it could be completely wrong.
It's got to be right. It's got to be right, Katie. It has to be right. There's a 105% chance that is right. With regards to Drata in particular, they are a continuous compliance, agentless continuous compliance company that just got their Series B funding. Their growth is strong. They're doing great from a growth perspective. But I read something by Thomas Tungus recently. I think that's how you pronounce his name, from Redpoint Ventures, and he broke down how the unicorn rankings are actually happening these days and how the funding is occurring. And essentially, if you're hitting a really strong growth percentage, like 3x 2 years in a row on reasonable base, a lot of companies are getting 200x forward-looking expectation of revenue. So that means if you're at, say, 10 million today, you're saying you're going to be at 20 million tomorrow. You can expect 100 to 200x that forward-looking revenue expectation if you're a cloud-based SaaS company. And it's just this is coming off the comps of what's happening in the public market. And until that corrects, we're going to see blessings everywhere.
Yeah, and this is it's a popular category, but they're certainly not unique in the compliance automation category. We've seen quite a few SOC 2.
I think last week or the week before there was the who got picked up? Vanta did, or one of them did by One Trust, One Login picked them up. We talked about it a week or two ago.
Yeah, One Trust, not One Login. Yep.
Yeah, One Trust picked them up. So yeah, I mean those acquisitions are happening. That was probably a straight comp for them when they raised. They're probably the raise was probably done before they announced, but it could have been a direct comp.
And, maybe there's just some low-hanging fruit for the market here. Building a compliance automation, SaaS tool, doesn't require, heavy machine learning, a bunch of PhDs, maybe it's fairly easy to put together. And there really is this value that's just sitting out there to be collected up, because ISO 27K, SOC 2, making that easier on companies, there's a ton of value behind that. A lot of hours are poured into getting compliance with those and maintaining it. So, but the big deal with this one, like I said, there's almost 40 security unicorns going by the old number, but by the $1 billion valuation. But the big deal here is how quickly it happened. They're 10 months away from coming out of stealth and just a little over a year old.
Yeah, that's just absolutely crazy fast.
Yeah, and I read something else. Didn't make it into the news stories, but just talking about how a lot of VCs are looking at making a larger number of smaller investments now. They're kind of shifting their strategy and how they make some of these investments. So even though we see these big raises like this one's a 100 million Series B, which is a pretty big Series B. Instead of one lead carrying most of that, I guess we're seeing more and more VCs, participating in each of these rounds.
Yeah, they're getting in earlier and they're getting in faster at higher valuations. So seeds are higher, A's are higher, and everybody's shifting left in the earliness curve, and it's resulting in $10-20 million A's and $100 million B's.
Yeah.
Speaking of $10 million A's, we got the SCYTHE discussion there. Yeah,
SCYTHE announced a $10 million Series A breach and attack simulation vendor. A little bit looks like Gula Tech Adventures is involved in that. A little bit different approach from some of the other breach and attack simulation vendors we've seen out there. And I forget the name, but I did see a new one pop up, a new BAS or breach and attack simulation vendor pop up in the last couple of days. So interesting that I've been kind of interested in seeing what happens with that market. It wasn't huge. There have been some acquisitions there already. FireEye made one, and just interested to see where that market goes. I feel like it's really handy to be able to simulate attacks. To make it easy to simulate attacks, testing products, testing your own controls and things like that. So yeah, just interested to see what that gets combined with. It is a bit of a feature as a product. So we'll see what happens there.
But then again, so is compliance.
Yeah, it's GRC. That's going to get plugged into some GRC portal.
I think the distinction that SCYTHE is making, as well as a couple of others in the space, as you mentioned, Adrian, is that they're trying to change what the market is. Instead of breach and attack simulation, they're talking about emulation, and they're going very nuanced after a certain segment of the market and certain buyers, certain users of their platform. My dog agrees. And so that space, the BaaS space, is kind of bifurcating just a little bit because BaaS didn't take off as much as I think a lot of people thought it might. I think it's still a good space. I think there are a few great leaders, but it's not, if you look at other spaces in cybersecurity, it just doesn't have the huge amount of vendors in it trying to make a name. So there definitely is room for improvement in this space. And I think SCYTHE has been trying over the last couple of years to say, we're not breach and attack simulation, we're breach and attack emulation, which, is a little bit nuanced, but their approach is different. And, I know that they've been working hard, so this is a great win for them. Series A, nice modest Series A, which is kind of good to see in some ways. More money helps in certain areas, but it hurts in others. So nice modest Series A. I think that's a good sign.
Super healthy for Bryson. Plus, their icon is a unicorn, like rainbow unicorns. So loving that. Good on them.
Well, we'll see if they can. We'll see if they can hit a valuation that gives them a different kind of unicorn status.
Didn't you have him on your cooking show, Adrian?
What's that?
Didn't you have Bryson on your cooking show recently?
No, Bryson has a cooking show. It was a couple months ago, but yeah, he had me on his cooking show. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. The next one, we've got 4 acquisitions here. One of them we already talked about. We talked about the SPAC QOMPLX acquisition, but this next one is pretty big. McAfee to be acquired by an investor group. I assume that's a PE shop for $14 billion. And important to point out here that if you've been listening to other episodes, the enterprise side of McAfee got merged with FireEye. This is the consumer side of McAfee that's worth $14 billion. So a lot more value in the consumer side of McAfee than in the enterprise side, which is why they split them up.
Yeah, it's quite the investor group. Advent, Permira, Crosspoint Capital, some Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. It's just a who's who to pull that kind of capital together. I don't know what they're going to do there. They're either going to squeeze blood from the turnip and just make it way more efficient and turn a profit for a while, or they're going to chop it up. It's a good question. Not sure exactly what they're going to do there.
We've seen a lot of consolidation in that space. I think, what was it? I get all the Aviras and Avasts mixed up, but I think it was Norton LifeLock and Avast that merged, which had previously, I think Avast was previously Avast and AVG that merged. I might have gotten that mixed up with Avira in there somewhere, but it could be more consolidation, and then they take it public.
Yeah, I think the key storyline here is the big number. It's just a lot of money for consumer product that in general, like, I don't know about you, but when's the last time you put a McAfee, however you pronounce it, one of their products on anything? It's been a decade
when
since
it came with it. The answer to that is when it came with it pre-installed.
When you couldn't get rid of it. You'd never intentionally put it on anything.
Yeah. Interesting. Of course, they're doing a lot more than just that. I think McAfee, Norton LifeLock. Well, it's right there in the name, LifeLock. They're doing other services for consumers there. They all have VPNs. So they're somewhat. AV endpoint security is still the core of both of those businesses. But they're a lot more distributed now than they used to be. But yeah, in general, this is just part of we're seeing the old world of endpoint security, antivirus, all that's getting broken up and sorted out, and kind of making space for the newer companies in that space. Domain tools and Farsight security. So both companies kind of focused on this is like a piece of attack surface management. Looking for phishing infrastructure. Helping with takedown stuff like that. Pulling insights out of DNS data, things like that. Kind of an interesting pairing there.
Yeah, EASM, I think they're calling it external asset or external attack surface management.
Yep. And then WPScan, acquired by Automattic. It's a pretty big one. To provide some context for this, WordPress, I think, is something like 30% of all websites, runs 30% of all websites on the internet. And in the CMS market, they've got at least half of the market, if not like 70% or something like that, of the content management system market. And just about everybody has at least one WordPress site somewhere, if not a dozen. And Automattic is the commercial company behind WordPress, not as well known as the WordPress brand. But then WPScan is probably the biggest vulnerability management tool out there for WordPress. Not only do they provide a tool for scanning a WordPress instance looking for vulnerabilities, but they also kind of have their own CVE type database. They've got their own database of vulnerabilities. Some of them have CVEs, some of them don't. They only exist in the WPScan database, and it's largely been maintained by a single person for a while. So, kind of like one of these HD Moore Metasploit Rapid7 type deals, but still a pretty big deal. And if it goes like Rapid7, I think it's a positive thing. Seeing some stable commercial support, for the security tool here. Some people might say, I'm not sure if I want my security tool to be owned by the company that it's securing, but it's worked out pretty well in other cases. So I'm pretty positive about it.
From a business perspective, this is by far the most intelligent acquisition we have on our list. When you set up anything in WordPress using the stuff Automattic, the WordPress.com, the WP engine, all of that, you literally just flip a switch, pay a little bit extra, and you get WPScan built in, right? So it makes 100% sense to have that directly owned by the company. As from a business perspective, I think you're bringing up interesting points on the technology perspective. But this makes total sense. I don't know what they paid for it, but it should be $14 billion like McAfee. No, I'm kidding, but you get the point.
Yeah, and it's a very slick tool, very easy to use. Trying to remember who I built it for, but I wrote a script that would basically give you kind of a binary result out of a WP scan, where we could build it into like a CI/CD pipeline where, you just point to this script and it scans it, brings back the result on whether there are any critical vulnerabilities or not. But and it's also baked into some other commercial vulnerability management products. Like I know, I believe a fork of WPScan is built into SecureWorks Tejas VDR product.
Yep, not surprised at all.
All right, so we've got an IPO here. HashiCorp is not a security company, but kind of like Elastic and some of these other, GitLab, some of these other very dev and DevOps focused, AppSec focused companies. They do have some security tools and are very important for security. Like a lot of people know HashiCorp for Vault, for their secret storage product.
Yep, and a $10 billion valuation is very indicative of why unicorns are common.
Yep.
Yeah,
I'm telling you, $8 billion.
Skirting around the edges of security, and this, I think it's important to note that in this article it says HashiCorp is aiming for a valuation above 10 billion in a listing. So they're using the market, trying to use it in a smart way to do good things for the company, but it is an indication of how people and even those on the edges of the cybersecurity market may see cybersecurity.
And look at the IPOs that came before him. Sentinel-1, they aimed above, and they did. They adjusted it, the pricing, I think quite a bit over what they were originally looking at, and they got it. So why not?
Well, the worst you can get is a no, right?
Right. Well, I think the worst you can get is, we already talked about QOMPLX, but very different companies taking different routes.
Yeah, that was an oversimplification. Yeah, for sure.
HashiCorp is also interesting because from founding, I think they've always been 100% remote. Even the founders don't live in the same place, in the same physical proximity to each other. And they've got a very interesting and unique culture there. It seems to work pretty well for them. And, I think that also, like, you have to take into account, this money they're raising, probably going to be more effectively used than somebody, with a, downtown San Francisco high-rise office.
Right, and that's smart. You can focus your resources. You don't have to pay for these big buildings and everything that comes with it. I mean, that's obviously the future of work, but it'll be interesting to see what they do, when this whole thing shakes out in a couple of months, couple of years.
So we've got a few new tools here. One of them is one of the many open source tools that Netflix has built called Console Me. Love the kind of the pun built in there, console me, and it is kind of if I'm understanding it correctly, it's kind of a CSPM type product, but I hear through the grapevine, and I'm pretty sure it's okay to say in public, that there's a startup that's going to be based around this. So not the first time we've seen a security product based around an open source product made by another company. I think Upticks and OS Query is a great example of that. Facebook created OS Query originally, and Upticks product is based around that. Always a good solid foundation, I think, using a strong open source product that's already in use at some pretty large companies.
Yeah, there were some investor theses a while back where investors were primarily raising funds on backing things that came out of the FANG companies, out of Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, right? Anything that they did from an open source perspective, you could instantly get printed into a seed fund and get going on it. So I think it was valuable, right? A number of companies came out of those ideas. Now, this particular one I'm not as excited about because it feels like it's covered in many newer startups, including the one that I'm holding a brand for right here. This one is doing something similar, but there's a number of companies that are doing this kind of agentless CSPM for access and identity is kind of the way I'm going to describe it. And it's a really interesting way to do it. It'll be neat to see whether a commercial version or an open source version really wins this space.
Yeah, definitely. The next tool we have here is Firmware, which is really interesting. It's a framework that allows you to run embedded Linux firmware in a pretty standard Linux VM, which is neat. If you want to do some fuzzing, some bug bounty work, something like that, you can take a binary Netgear or ASUS firmware download, run it in a VM, and you don't have to own the hardware to test it. So pretty interesting tool. I found out about it because Paul is playing around with it. I think he's planning to do a tech segment around it, but very interesting tool. That is going to make security testing a lot easier.
Yep, my tech nerd side loves this one, other than the name, because it totally reminds me of, I don't remember the actual name of the company in Terminator or Terminator 2, but... Cyberdyne, that's them. It reminds me of Cyberdyne too much. Freaks me out. I'm afraid of Terminators.
It took me in two directions. It made me think of Cyberdyne, but the first thing was Fixident that occurred to me when I read it. Somebody posted it in Slack, and I was like, Firmware, is that what you use to keep your dentures in?
Neither one is good. Firmware is for keeping your dentures in your Android robots.
Branding isn't quite as important with open source product. products. But yeah, we see equally horrifying branding happen in the commercial world and in the open source world.
So now the real question, though, is this last one. How are you going to squeeze the debate and discussion we could have around Israeli spyware into this before we wrap?
We don't get deep into, I mean, the closest we get to political stuff, is more talking about the funding and the investment side of things. That deep conversation is going to happen, and I think has already happened. Paul Security Weekly yesterday, I think, did dive into this, but I feel like, folks getting their news from us should at least know about it. There are impacts for vendor products and things like that. I did listen to some of that Paul Security Weekly yesterday, and apparently you can request exceptions, written exceptions, to be able to use some of these NSO spyware tools. But I don't know if you're likely to get it approved. For the NSA, probably, but.
This flashed me back for sure. I wrote spyware for for BlackBerry in 2000. Gosh, had to be like 2011, 2010 timeframe. I wrote some spyware, publicly released it, presented it at ShmooCon, ended up presenting it to a 3-letter organization's kind of like technology event, and then was cornered in the hallway afterward by a spooky looking guy asking me like if they could buy it for the government and how we could get it in the government. It was a really, really odd conversation. I just excused myself and moved on very, very quickly. But this stuff's been going on for a decade or more. Yeah.
You didn't feel a prick in your neck and wake up somewhere strange?
I might have, but I can neither confirm nor deny that.
Yeah, I remember BB Proxy was a really interesting one for BlackBerry.
I wrote BB what I can't even remember, BB Spy, TXS BB Spy or something was the name of it, and it was actually behind an Android. It was a BlackBerry game where you had to like do the lunar lander game, and in the meantime, it's exfiltrating all your data like on one of 20 different exfiltration points. Had remote CNC. It was pretty cool, but 10 years ago for the wrong platform, somebody else released it at the same show for Apple. So I was kind of upstaged.
Well, the scary thing about BlackBerries back in the day, that even though like at their core they focused a lot more on security, if you're using a Bez server and you didn't set up that Bez server correctly, from a network architecture standpoint, each BlackBerry was a device on your internal network. And that's what BB Proxy did, is provided a route directly into that network from the outside. So yeah.
Real quickly, Adrian, are we? I had to put my old man glasses on because you're talking about Bez servers. Just saying. Okay, you're really, really dating us right now.
All right. Anything else y'all want to add before we wrap?
What about Katie? I've been dominating this conversation. Katie, you got anything you want to throw in the fire here?
I'm wondering where our squirrel story is.
Oh,
yes,
shoot.
The squirrels.
I missed it. I missed it this week.
You missed a squirrel for the week.
Now, let me.
Hey, production team, if you got squirrels on tap, I don't know if you do. This might be like a last minute ad hoc, but if you got squirrels on, there they are. Thank you. We just needed to make sure we have the visual this week.
I feel better. I do.
I 100% do. Thank you for bringing that up, Katie.
There
All
is
the
a good
important things come from me.
If I were to just reach for one at the last minute, there's a great story on Vice about ghost kitchens that I found fascinating, where some of these local restaurants are represented as like a dozen or 24 different restaurants on some of these mobile apps like Uber Eats, and basically they're just taking the same ingredients and pretending they're a different restaurant, and the restaurant gets more sales through it. So
hacking the system. I love it.
It's got interviews with the owners who are kind of like of two minds, where they like the fact that they can get more business because they're actually advertising themselves as multiple different companies. It just gives them better chance of somebody landing on them, when they spin the food wheel, basically going through one of these apps looking for dinner. But at the same time, they worry that if people find out it's all the same restaurant, that they'll lose the trust of the customers, and it looks kind of shady to the customers.
So I didn't read this story, obviously, because you just pulled it out right now, but my favorite Indian restaurant actually did that. I had no idea what this was when it started, but all of a sudden they had 3 or 4 different names. And I figured it out pretty quickly because I was looking for new, during the pandemic at the beginning, especially when you couldn't go out to eat, I was looking for places to pick up from because, who wants to cook? Sorry, Adrian. And I would see these ghost restaurants point back to the same menu. And I did think it was a little weird. I just figured they were trying to spread their wings because it was hard during the pandemic for restaurants.
Spread their wings.
Sorry, I didn't do that on purpose. But it is an interesting approach. Now that the restaurants have gone digital too. This is restaurant digital transformation 101, I guess.
Yeah. So what was really interesting about it is I didn't fully grasp if they were saying this was the case or not, but apparently back when Travis was still running Uber, they created a separate company just to set up these ghost kitchens, these separate restaurants, and so the company that actually comes up with them and does all the branding work and creates the menus and the graphic design for all that, they get a cut of this. And I think one of those is they're implying they're a subsidiary or at least a partner of Uber. So they're the platform that actually takes the payment and delivers this to the customer is getting a chunk of this.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And not
I'll see
the
if I
best
can find
fit
it, and
necessarily.
I'll throw it into the notes if I should be able to find it. So I'll get it into.
We can always have people come into Discord if they want to chat there. We can have people come onto our Twitch stream, chat live there. They can always get these links from all those places.
Yep. All right. Well, that's all I've got today. Thanks so much, Katie and Tyler, for joining us today. And big thanks to everybody who listened. We'll see you next week.